This is Movie Reviews. Today, I'm going to explain a comedy, horror, sci-fi film called Beyond Re-animator. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. During a sleepover in the yard, a young boy named Howard Phillips tells his friends scary stories about a man who supposedly chopped human body parts and ate them. The two young boys suddenly hear noises outside their tent, so they come out to investigate. Inside the house, Howard's sister, Emily, also hears strange noises. When the two boys enter the house, Emily runs into them and gets startled. Emily engages them in horseplay, thinking they were the ones who made the noise. Her laughter soon turns into terror when she sees a zombie approaching them. Emily stabs the zombie in the chest, but it doesn't affect him. Howard just cries in the corner as the zombie grabs Emily by the neck and repeatedly bashes her head against the wall. Soon, the cops arrive and shoot the zombie until he drops to the ground. Howard tries to wake his sister up, but he realizes she has already succumbed to her injuries. Later, Howard witnesses the police arresting Dr. Herbert West for performing horrendous experiments on corpses at the university hospital. After they shove Herbert into the police car, Howard notices Herbert looking at the ground. Howard sees a syringe filled with a green substance, so he picks it up. Herbert spends the next 13 years in prison, but he continues his experiments on rats with limited resources. When he catches a rat inside a vent, he electrocutes it to death and collects its energy in a tube. Before he could continue his experiment, Sergeant Moncho calls his attention to give him a notice about his new work assignment. In the next cell, inmate Cabrera waits for his pet Ratty to come out of the vent. When Ratty doesn't emerge, he gets furious with his cellmate, Moses, suspecting that he has something to do with his pet's disappearance. Moncho soon gets to their cell and hints that Herbert might have seen the rat. As the prisoners are heading to the yard, Dr. Howard Phillips arrives to begin his residency at the penitentiary. Before going to the clinic, Moncho takes him to the death house to meet with Warden Brando. In the execution room, Howard finds Brando talking to a reporter named Laura Olney. When Laura asks about his rehabilitation program, Brando stresses that the only thing that works in prison is the electric chair. He notes that he requires every new prisoner to sit on the chair to make them submit to him. When Howard interrupts their conversation, Brando asks him why he chose to do his residency in prison, so Howard explains that he is interested in institutionalized medicine. Brando recalls that Howard picked a specific inmate to help him at the clinic, so he advises the doctor to watch the prisoner carefully. He warns Howard that the particular inmate thinks he's smarter than the others, and his attitude could infect the other prisoners. Meanwhile, Moses suffers from a heart attack in the yard, so Howard immediately goes out to treat him. When Laura goes to the yard to observe, her ankle gets injured when an inmate accidentally steps on her. Howard and the guards soon lift Moses in a drop cloth to take him to the clinic. As soon as they get there, Howard asks Nurse Vanessa for a particular medicine to stabilize the patient's heart. The nurse notes that they don't have it, so Herbert suggests a different drug. After injecting the medication into Moses, Howard tries to revive him, but Herbert contends that he was already dead by the time they reached the clinic. Herbert asks Howard why he was picked to assist him in the clinic, so Howard discloses that he knows about Herbert's experiments. Herbert advises him not to believe everything he hears, but Howard notes that he saw the results with his own eyes. He then reveals that he was the kid who witnessed him getting arrested outside the university years ago. Howard shows him the syringe of the green substance he took from the site and tells Herbert that he wants to work with him. Herbert surmises that the substance might have been destabilized after 13 years, but he uses it on Moses to determine if it will affect the corpse. Herbert surmises that it's not going to work, but he thanks Howard for bringing the substance, which he calls the reagent. As Howard asks him what he needs to recreate the solution, Moses suddenly gets up from the table. Howard asks Moses how he feels, but the inmate strangles him, so Herbert hits the prisoner in the head to help Howard break free. The guards soon arrive while Howard is looking for drugs to sedate Moses. As they try to subdue the inmate, Moses grabs a guard and bites his arm. When Brando and Laura arrive at the clinic, Moses suddenly cowers in fear and asks the warden for forgiveness. Moses suddenly grabs Brando by the crotch, but the warden manages to push him away. As Howard attempts to explain what happened to the patient, he accidentally drops the syringe of reagent on the floor. Brando adds 12 months to Herbert's prison sentence and puts the entire penitentiary under lockdown due to the incident. Before Herbert returns to his cell, he gives Howard the list of things he needs for the reagent. As Howard is about to leave the penitentiary, he sees Laura waiting for him outside. Laura tells him that her ankle is still in pain, so Howard offers to drive her home. Howard ends up staying for dinner, and the two have an honest conversation about why they're so interested in the penitentiary. Laura asks him why he chose to do his residency in prison, so Howard explains that he witnessed his sister die when he was young and felt helpless when he couldn't resuscitate her. When Laura inquires about the inmate who helped him at the clinic, Howard discloses that Herbert once worked at a university hospital and researched death as a disease. He notes that Herbert's experiments got out of control, and one of the reanimated corpses broke into their house. As Howard is about to leave the apartment, he takes the opportunity to kiss Laura. When Howard examines Moses the next day, he finds out that the inmate's behavior is getting worse. He tells Herbert about it, but Herbert dismisses his concerns and notes that he will soon find something to restore order in Moses' brain. He pleads with Howard to help him go to the next phase of his experiments, noting that they have to carry it out covertly. Soon, Howard and Herbert set up a lab inside the clinic to create more of Herbert's reagent. After work, Howard regularly stops by Laura's house to make love to her. Unbeknownst to him, Laura is investigating Herbert's previous experiments, most of which had resulted in the violent behavior of his subjects. After creating enough reagents, Herbert decides to test the formula on a dead rat. Meanwhile, Laura convinces Brando to give her access to some areas of the penitentiary by pretending to be interested in him. After Herbert injects the reagent into the rat, he tells Howard about his theory that nanoplasmic energy is present in every cell of each living being. Soon, the rat starts shaking violently and tries to break free from Howard's grip. Herbert shows him a capsule filled with nanoplasmic energy and assures him that it will give true life to the resurrected rat. Soon after administering the nanoplasmic energy to the rat, the animal becomes more docile and stops struggling in Howard's hand. Later that day, Laura goes to the solitary confinement section of the penitentiary and bribes Moncho to let her into Moses' cell. When she gets inside, Moncho assures Laura that Moses can't hurt her because he's in a straitjacket. In the yard, Cabrera threatens to kill Herbert because of his lost pet, but he lets him go when Herbert gives him the resurrected rat. A while later, Brando sees Laura trying to interview Moses. As Brando berates her for pretending to like him, Moses lunges at the warden and bites off his ear. In response, Brando beats Moses with his cane until he stops moving. Laura starts fearing for her life, so she assures Brando that she won't tell anyone about what he did to Moses. However, Brando is not convinced, so he makes her walk on all fours and bark like a dog. When Laura tries to escape, Brando grabs her and strangles her. At the lab, Herbert tells Howard that they need to get Moses in the clinic so he can inject him with Ratty's nanoplasm. Howard expresses his concern about transferring an animal's nanoplasm into a human, but Herbert claims that it's a neutral energy that's similar in all kinds of living organisms. Suddenly, the nurse and the guards bring a corpse to the clinic and tell Howard that there's been an incident. When Howard looks at the corpse, he is shocked to see that it's Laura's body under the sheets. Moncho claims that Moses killed her in solitary, and he ended up dead as well. After getting rid of the guards and the nurse, Howard decides to use the reagent to resurrect Laura. As soon as Howard injects her with the formula, Laura comes back to life and starts struggling to break free from the gurney. When Howard releases her from the straps, she crouches on the table and barks like a dog. Herbert suggests bringing Laura to the lab, so they can bring her back to her senses. The nurse and the guards return to the solitary cell to pick up Moses' corpse, but he's not there. Meanwhile, Cabrera returns to his cell from yard time and immediately puts Ratty on the floor. The rat runs toward the small house that Cabrera created, but Moses grabs the rodent and puts it in his mouth. When Moncho arrives, Moses spits the rat at him, and the rodent bites the guard's nose. Moncho tries to kill the rodent, but Cabrera shoves him to the wall. Later, Brando stops by the clinic to get treatment for his injured ear. Howard immediately hides Laura when he hears the warden's voice. When Brando discovers the lab, he threatens to fire Howard and report him so he would lose his medical license. Brando soon discovers that Laura has been resurrected, so Herbert hits him in the head to knock him out. Meanwhile, Moses joins Cabrera in beating up Moncho. After the guard drops to the floor, Cabrera grabs his keys and unlocks all the cells. The inmates immediately come out and start attacking the other guards. Back at the lab, Herbert inserts a device in the back of Brando's neck and electrocutes him to extract his nanoplasm. When Cabrera sees Ratty leaving the cell, he grabs the rodent and tries to kiss it, but the rat bites his mouth. Cabrera gets furious upon realizing that there's something wrong with his pet. Soon after Howard and Herbert inject Brando's nanoplasm into Laura, she comes to her senses, but she doesn't know what happened to her. Herbert explains that she died after Brando strangled her, and they brought her back to life. Laura suddenly starts contorting, and lumps start moving around her body. When Laura gets up, she accuses Herbert and Howard of turning her into a guinea pig. As she tells the two doctors to get away from her, her voice changes as if another personality is taking over her body. However, she starts asking Howard for help upon reaching the clinic. When Cabrera heads to the infirmary to confront Herbert, he sees Laura with Howard as they leave the clinic. As Cabrera starts mistreating her, Laura pleads with Howard to help her, but her demeanor suddenly changes, and she smacks Cabrera in the head. Laura immediately runs, so Cabrera goes after her. Howard tries to look for her in a cell block, but he gets isolated in an area with the guards. Soon, Cabrera and the other inmates catch Laura inside a cell. As Cabrera approaches her, Laura grabs him by the neck and strangles him. At the lab, Herbert resurrects Brando and injects Ratty's nanoplasm into his spine. After telling Brando about his plan to escape, Herbert leaves him bound to the table and opens the door to ensure the inmates find him. When the SWAT team arrives, Howard sneaks into the block to look for Laura. While Herbert gathers some supplies at the clinic, Brando sneaks up on him and beats him with his cane. Later, Brando goes to the prison block, carrying a bag full of reagents. An inmate tries to attack him, so Brando drops the bag to defend himself. Moncho suddenly arrives and asks Brando for help, but he decides to beat him, repeatedly. Upon realizing that he's dead, Brando grabs a syringe of reagent from the bag. Laura wakes up inside a cell and finds herself surrounded by the mangled corpses of the inmates who tried to attack her. Laura screams in horror when she sees her fingers twisting uncontrollably. When Brando finds her, Laura tearfully tells him that she's not responsible for mutilating the inmates. As Brando taunts Laura, an inmate named Speedball steals several syringes of reagent from the bag. Brando leads her to a corridor where several inmates with nooses around their necks are standing on platforms. After Brando kicks a platform, he pulls out a syringe of reagent to inject the hanging inmate as he dies from asphyxiation. Elsewhere in the penitentiary, Speedball injects himself with the reagent, and immediately starts convulsing, but he seems to enjoy the formula's effect. When Howard comes across Herbert in the cell block, he points out that Laura is not the same person. Realizing that Herbert's experiments always end up in tragedy, Howard holds Herbert responsible for killing his sister and admonishes him for claiming it was just an unfortunate incident. In response, Herbert notes that he can't do anything about his sister anymore, but he can still save Laura. When Herbert suggests that Brando might have taken her to the death house, Howard gets furious with him upon realizing that he resurrected the warden. The SWAT team soon comes across Moses while he's chasing after Vanessa. The squad leader tells the others to hold their fire, thinking that he poses no harm when he drops to his knees. However, the inmate suddenly attacks one of the operatives, so they fire at him until he drops to the ground. At the death house, Brando forces Laura to go down on him, but she bites off his member. Howard hears Laura screaming while Brando puts her in the electric chair. As Howard heads to the execution room, the resurrected Cabrera, who has lost the lower half of his body, attacks Herbert. However, Herbert manages to fend him off and hurl him across the room. Howard soon reaches the execution room and finds Laura in anguish because of the strange personality inside her. She begs Howard to get rid of it, but the other personality suddenly takes over. Brando attempts to crawl toward Laura, but she hits him with a cane and proceeds to knock Howard down. Meanwhile, Speedball attempts to inject himself with another dose of reagent. Herbert tries to grab the syringe, but Speedball evades him and injects the formula into his arm. Moments later, Speedball starts convulsing, and his innards suddenly pop out of his body. When Herbert sees his eye on the floor, he decides to put it in his pocket. In the execution room, Laura comes to her senses after Howard subdues her. However, the other personality takes control while Howard is kissing her. Laura starts beating him up, but Howard refrains from fighting back. Herbert eventually arrives at the execution room and finds Brando crawling like a rat. As Herbert attempts to beat him up, Cabrera emerges and lunges at him. However, Herbert manages to hit Cabrera with the cane. Brando attempts to fight back against Herbert, but Herbert gains the upper hand and straps him to the electric chair. As Laura strangles Howard, she tries to regain control and begs Howard to kill her. Howard grabs a knife nearby and hesitantly slashes her neck. He continues slicing her neck while the strange personality taunts him. Soon, Herbert turns on the electric chair and watches Brando's face melt. After grabbing a syringe of reagent from the bag, Herbert notices Howard clutching Laura's body. Howard notes that he had to kill her, but he stresses that he wants her back. While referring to her as Emily, Howard promises to take care of her. As the SWAT team approaches, Herbert grabs Howard's ID and heads out of the penitentiary. Later, he approaches the gate while pushing a gurney with a body. When a guard stops him, he claims to be Dr. Howard Phillips and stresses that he needs to get his patient to the hospital. Back in the death house, the SWAT team finds Howard clutching Laura's decapitated head. As they take him away, Howard sees Laura's head laughing at him, so he just responds by laughing back at her. When Herbert finally gets out of the penitentiary, he throws Cabrera's eyeball to the ground and walks away with a bag full of reagent.